Welcome to my channel. If you long for more alone time, this is the story for you, and not just in the sense that playing it in public will drive people away. Before I say anything more, please don't be too embarrassed to like this video. I promise I won't tell anyone, and I'd surely appreciate your comments. Subscribing will make my little heart go pitter-patter. This is a heavy story and as serious as I'm capable of being. It is the story of a young gypsy boy living alone after a plague has depopulated Europe. Then the Aztecs show up along with a girl voiced by my lovely wife Debbie. Anyway, this girl, it's not fair to tell you the story without making you suffer through the entire video. So I give you Lisbon Sunrise. It was the faintest sound in the dark which told me, for what seemed the first time in ages, I was no longer alone. By my best reckoning, it was the year of our Lord 1526, though I could no more tell you the month and day than I could tell you why God's anger had struck so savagely, yet left me alive. The noise was a faint humming, coming from seaward. I moved down to the steps of the palace, loading my pistols as I passed the places I cleaned of desiccated corpses. I knew I had angered the Lord. Sinners though they had been, they still deserved burial. But there had been too many. Lisbon was a city of corpses, and I burned a few thousand, but there were hundreds of houses, churches, and shops I had not visited. The wolves from the hills were more God's servants than I, at least in that regard. In my dark heart, I did not regret their help. I dared not think of the lands beyond as I passed through the palace gates and walked the strangely clean streets, no longer decorated with human offal or any of the other debris of humanity. The houses deteriorated as stones freed themselves from man's unnatural organization. The streets became uneven as years of rainwater and wind undid all human creation. In the years since the plague had struck, God had begun the lengthy work of erasing the mark of Cain from the land. Yet I still lived. As I rounded the corner and caught sight of the water, my breath froze in my chest. 3 ships floated in the bay, still miles from the shore, but ships with sails. Had an unknown land escaped the plague? Perhaps these were ships from Jerusalem or another land without sin. Silly thinking there, I had no virtue myself. I was Romani, a worthless traveling gypsy, whose parents had hidden him in a cave when the plague began. Soon Lisbon illuminated its city squares with Romani, Jews, and others believed impure, offered as sacrifices to take the ravages of disease away. Mama kissed my head, sprinkled frog's blood over it, and whispered,
"Lord, take me, but forgive my beautiful boy, who I love with all my heart."
Still I've heard to think that such a blessing would have an effect. With all the good who died, blasphemy for me to think of myself as spared through grace. More likely the devil still needed a toy. Satan played with me skillfully, tempting me with sacrilege in every step of every day. I had seen no living man for 26 years. Survival had been easy. The dead left me food, shelter, weapons, everything I could want for health, but no companions, no one to talk with save myself. The years without my people had run long. The water shone with the blue of the finest jewelry, bringing these strange vessels straight toward me. Curiosity is said to be Satan's greatest servant, and it possessed me that day. I reached the docks where the mighty fleet of the Portuguese Navy rotted and sank. The ships crossing the bay were larger than the greatest galleons, but I already spotted differences. The sails had dropped and 100 oars sprouted and powered the ships into land, aiming for an open dock. I walked toward them, ignoring the wise counsel of the angels of fear. As they closed, I realized the ships were like nothing I'd seen. Carvings of men's heads emerged from snakes' bodies, striking outward from the bows. Other carvings continued along the top of the boat's side. The few I saw were skulls, large cats, and contorted faces of men and women in distress. Running the length of the boats were carvings of snakes,
angry flying snakes, but the boats were not half so interesting as the people. The middle ship pulled into the lead. A powerful, dark man stood at the center. He wore a feather headdress with colors such as I have never seen in any Portuguese bird. Bright red, yellow, but especially green plumage sprayed from ear to ear across his scalp. He wore a similarly brilliant cloak and grasped a spear. His bearing was erect and proud, but his features and tanned skin were as one of my blood. Could this be a Romani as well? Had my people survived in some distant land? Behind him stood something I had not seen since my mother's kiss. 2 women stood at his side, and I judged them beautiful. The women dressed in tan tunics decorated with green and red stripes around the neckline. They wore headdresses with fewer feathers, less impressive than the man's. They seemed pure, and I felt unworthy of meeting their stares, embarrassed by the odd urge they awoke in me. I wished to see more of them, but worried by the temptation they represented. What I saw promised full and ripe womanhood. Surely this man was a leader, and these women served him. Kaka and Chukasle in Akhisla. Many other figures scurried to the boat as the lead ship rode within a few yards of the dock. But my eyes were on the leading 3. The men and women did not speak. The sounds came from other voices. I stepped back from the landing as 4 men with ropes vaulted across the forecastle and fought to hold the ship in place. Others jumped from the side, working as more ropes flew ashore. I lost sight of these a few seconds after the boat touched the dock. The leader grabbed the woman on his right, turned her about, and pushed her to the deck, going down with her. Others came from behind and fell upon her. The man stood up, said more words I did not understand as his hand slid under his cloak and brought forth a black knife. The men on the dock fell on their knees, then on their faces. From the ship the other girl fixed me with a stare with her bottomless brown eyes, lips moving in prayer as I screamed, "Don't harm her!" The leader reappeared, holding a red blob in his hand, his arm coated in blood. He held the dripping mass before him, and I knew it was a heart. His eyes locked on me as he said more words before casting the dead heart into the water. In this land filled with death, how could these people bring more? He saw me bend over and vomit uncontrollably, as if trying to release every bit of food I had known since my return to Lisbon. By the time I straightened up, 2 pairs of powerful arms clasped me as the ship lurched sideways to the dock and tied onto the posts. Someone removed my pistols from my belt. The leader came to me and slapped me once, scowling as he looked at me. He turned to a soldier at his side and said other words, and all around me laughed, save for the woman whose eyes looked at the dirt, as did the sides of her mouth. The leader tapped his chest and said, "Oxystol." I said, "Ushalael," as best I could, though I struggled with the sounds. One soldier punched me in the back. I repeated it 3 times before he nodded and pointed at me. "Emilian," I said. "Melian," he said. I did not correct him. More came out of him, phrases ending with the inflection of questions, but I had no answers for him. Finally, he struck me in the belly with the base of a sword and doubled me at the waist. The sword was strange, all of wood save for 13 sharp flecks of obsidian embedded in the shaft and giving the blade its bite. Others had similar swords, and some carried spears. My wrists were bound, and I walked through Lisbon with Uxistral and his warriors. The invaders entered buildings, glancing about, their eyes particularly falling on metal goods, which they at once confiscated. Finally, they reached a church. Uxistral stopped and examined the building's face, lingering over the painted glass in the doors. As fate would have it, it was a church I emptied of bodies many weeks before today. The party drifted into the nave, examining the scene in the windows and the painted images of Old and New Testament. We reached the sanctuary and the altar. They had been quiet throughout the tour. Now the leader nodded and turned to one of his warriors. The warriors dragged another forward and held the man with his back to the altar. I saw what I had not seen on the ship, as the knife parted the man's breast as if cutting cheese. Again my body revolted, but I had nothing left to retch. Many hands ejected me from the church, and the warriors spit at me and kicked me before Oxystal came out and stopped the torment. We resumed our procession. As we walked through the town, the woman began talking with me, but I found their words unimaginable, so I began pointing at objects with my head and giving her the Portuguese names, which she picked up quickly. I learned her name was Metskamatoli, and she allowed me to call her Metsket, which made her laugh. I longed to hear more of that laugh. Noticing this, Oxystal came over and spoke to her, and she began working harder to learn words. Metskets in my hands were unbound, though 2 guards still paid close attention to us. Gestures worked better than words, and she pantomimed eating. Through her gestures in her station, I learned she was a prisoner, and her captors were called Tanakas. Food was not a problem. As I cleaned the city, I gathered provisions, and there were still many gardens and vines that grew fruits and vegetables. Sadly, most of the house dogs and cats had long since been eaten by the beasts who came down from the mountains. I had killed wolves, bears, and lions in self-defense, and now they avoided me. They had the sense to avoid the threat which I had met so guilelessly. I led my captors to a nearby vineyard and ate a few grapes to show they were safe, feeding a few to Metsket to further prove the point. The vines were quickly cleared, and we scattered to nearby houses. The warriors left Metsket and me alone in what had once been a cobbler's shop. I noted the strangers wore sandals and were very interested in shoes, though they did not seem to care for them. The floor was hard, and the cobbler's bed had long since surrendered to time. But even with my hands bound, I gathered cloth for bedding. I gestured for Metsket to lie down on the makeshift bed. Metsket smiled and reached out for me. She shivered a bit, and I brought my bound wrists around her, and found she fit wonderfully next to me. I spoke words of endearment, which she repeated until our lips found another engagement, and her beauty enfolded me. The lady and I only kissed, though fire tempted, but I found happiness that night. And it took a long time to drift to sleep intoxicated by her warm, firm body, so unlike any I had known before now. Shame woke me. What was I doing with this woman? Sin had destroyed the land, and I was letting desire grip my soul. Surely I would anger God, and he would finish purging the lands. The evil wasn't Metsket's fault. She was an innocent, but I knew better and should not allow us to be led astray. I lay still, unable to disengage without waking her, and uncomfortable with the Satan-sent feelings invading my body. Soon her eyes opened. She smiled, and her lips reached up for me. I shook my head. No.
No?
It is sinful. I will not pollute you.
Metsket ugly?
I worked my arms out from around her. Metsket is not ugly, but this is wrong. At that point, warriors came into the room and grabbed us, hauling us into the street where there was a breakfast of strange vegetables which grew on a stick with little red, yellow, and green seeds. It was tasty. I studied the Tanakas. They were a mixed group. Many were warriors, but there were also people who appeared to be there to follow orders and must be slaves. Some of these slaves were women. None of them were as beautiful as Metsket, but they all had the brown coloring that reminded me of my family. What would Mama and Papa say of these people? The Tanakas must have made a great voyage and be travelers in the spirit of the gypsies. But the sacrifices weighed heavily against them, and I noticed that a few of the slave women came from the men's houses, crying as if something terrible had happened to them in the night. We spent the day traveling from shop to shop. I decided I'd shown them enough weapons and focused on clothing stores. The warriors were interested in Portuguese fashions at first, and more than a little amused, but this didn't last.
Bored. Sure more metal?
Metsket hadn't spoken to me since the early morning. I led the party to a blacksmith shop. There they found something more interesting than tools, horseshoes, and the shop's most recent work. There were 4 skeletons on the floor. The Tanakas appeared afraid. on Uxasal spoke to Metsket.
Why everyone dead?
We sinned before God and he punished us.
Sinned?
Fought God's will. Many words passed between Uxasal and Metsket. The shop was left unlooted. I remembered a store I'd cleaned and led them toward it. Uxasal suddenly grabbed Metsket and walked her into an alley. When I moved to follow, warriors blocked my way and held me as they went out of sight. A few minutes later they reappeared. Metsket's eyes stayed on the ground, and the rest of the day she did not talk to me. Occasionally a tear dripped down her cheek. As we walked through the ruins, I felt a heaviness in my stomach and a catch at the back of my throat. I felt her sadness and realized I wanted to do nothing more than to make it go away. But how would I do that? That night, the guards deliberately tied us together so that our arms were around each other. The warriors laughed as they did this, and I heard Uxastal's name several times. The name enraged me, and I imagined hitting him repeatedly before the body of the sad woman next to me flushed out my anger. Yet I hoped for the opportunity to repay him. I remembered her kisses with longing and regret. I allowed myself to sink into her, hoping I could comfort her. Metsket, you are a splendid woman, I said. You are beautiful and kind, and I don't know what Uxasal did to you, but you are precious to me. I'm not sure what she understood, but I continued to speak softly and encouragingly, even after she began crying. Metsket cried for a long time, and I cried with her as we nestled close to each other and slept through the night in innocence. The next morning our guards awoke us with laughter and opaque words whose meaning was clear. Metsket and I were unbound and taken before Uxastal, who handed me a pistol and spoke to Metsket. Metsket continued to keep her eyes on the ground. I avoided looking at her tormentor.
What do? Use?
Metsket said with a bowed head. This woman was not my slave. I reached under her chin and pulled her eyes to look into mine. Confusion shone there. I pointed to a spear and said, weapon. I gestured to a distant house and said, go far.
Show, please.
I looked at Uxastal and murder invaded my mind. But that thought was suicide and might doom Metsket. I quickly loaded the pistol, pointed at a door, and shot a hole in it. The warriors talked excitedly for several minutes. I turned away and paid attention to something more inviting. A pair of deep brown eyes set perfectly in a smooth face. There were tears in those eyes.
We make happy. No kill now.
She said, gesturing at the soldiers.
No kill now.
If we make them happy, they won't kill us?
Not now. Me die both sleeve. Emilian Tenochtitlan both Hutzputli thinks.
I fell into the eyes, swimming through to threaten her words, searching for an innocent meaning, but finding none. Still there was hope. I was guessing. Reluctantly, I sought to give lie to the truth. You will die when the boats leave? Maybe I could stop them. They did not take me seriously. Perhaps I could sabotage the fleet. No, that was hopeless. The Tanakas were far too vigilant. She nodded.
When boats leave, give heart Hutztiliput.
How could they be so monstrous? My mind imagined Uxastal's black blade opening her tunic, plunging into her chest and ripping life from her. I had to repeat what I understood. Uxastal will cut out your heart and give it to Hutztiliput before the boats leave and return to your homeland?
Yes. Killed when boats leave. Killed for Hutztiliputli.
Uxastal barked at her.
Show how do.
Was I a little boy to be tearing up every few minutes? I wiped the water from my eyes in a way to suggest a sweaty forehead and focused on the delicate work of loading a pistol. Yes, I will show how to shoot the pistol. I put the pistol in front of me and carefully showed the cleaning, loading, and priming process. But when I moved to shoot, Uxastal took the weapon from me. In the exchange, we shot into the street. The ball bounced up and struck a warrior in the leg, who fell to the ground in agony. There was blood and the bone was broken. I spoke to Metsket as they attended him. The lady was remarkably intelligent and adept, and I learned Hutztiliput was some angel of war, perhaps something like the old gods of my people, though no Romani god had ever seemed so fearful to me. Metzget was to be sacrificed to him before the return voyage. My sacrifice would occur at a temple in a city called Tenochtitlan. I learned Uxastal and the warriors were Tanakas, but she was a slave now, though once she had been a princess in a city named Tarasco. The warrior spent quite a while inspecting the wounded soldier, determining he could walk after splinting the leg. Through most of the process, Uxastal's teeth appeared through a canine smile. I loaded the pistol for him and he shot it into a door. As I reloaded it, he had a warrior come over and pay close attention to the process. The warrior loaded it himself on the third trial. Uxastal was impatient with the loading process and angered when it misfired after the 10th shot. He fired angry words at Metzget, who turned to me. "The pistol needs a thorough cleaning after a few shots," I said as I started carefully cleansing the firing mechanism and scrubbing the inside of the barrel. While I did this, a different warrior loaded my other pistol. The warriors murdered doors until I ran out of ammunition.
Soldiers want more. Use wound enemies, then give enemies to Huitzilopochtli, Quetzalcoatl.
And she listed off more names. I scanned the Tanakas and noticed one standing to the side and holding his head. There was a black bruise forming in his armpit. "When did they leave?" I said.
Tomorrow, ships filling, find much food, metal goods, want pistols.
"They shall have them." There was an armory by the shore where they would find more than they could carry. I led them there and showed them how to enter. The Tanakas were happy to leave me outside, where I captured a frog. The warriors were too busy loading the armory carts to worry with a slave. On the way back to our prison, I showed them to a tavern, pointing out the bottles of wine and showing the use of a corkscrew. The Tanakas were well pleased with the discovery. Metzget let me know it was an unfamiliar taste to them, though they had intoxicating drinks.
Thank you. You Uxastal, kill me tomorrow. Warriors, relax tonight, be better.
Metzget did not understand how much better the wine would make tomorrow. I would not allow the night to end with us in Tanaka's custody. Soldiers bound us again, and I watched the knot tying carefully. Despite the wine, the knots were still intricate and fought untying doggedly. Metzget worked mine with more skillful fingers. During this time, the Tanaka warriors became louder. As I came free, her arms surrounded me.
Have a good night.
Full lips sought mine. Reluctantly, I pulled my mouth from her lips and smiled at her disappointment before placing my lips next to one of her butterfly ears. "We will have a great night and many more. Tonight we leave them. Once we get out of this building, they will never find us. But first there is something I must do." The frog was dead, but so had been what Mama used. I inspected the bed and found a large splinter I used to puncture it. I dripped blood over Metzget and repeated the blessing, asking God to move my blessing to this lovely girl who did not deserve to die, binding my life and my death to hers. As I said this, the thought came to me that I could give my life to her without dying, and this thought filled me with a joyful longing that made this the most sacred moment of my life. The warriors should be asleep by now, but they were still noisy. Metzget and I turned to each other's lips, and parts of our body beneath our kisses. Metzget guided me into another revelation, and we slept despite ourselves. I awoke in pitch darkness, took Metzget's arm, and we moved to the door. There we found a guard sitting outside, head lolling in a nap. I would not risk him awakening, so I placed my hand across his mouth and drove my splinter into his neck. We took his weapons and crept through the scattered bodies in the room into the door. Outside, there was a full moon. Peeking out, I saw a figure in a colored robe and headdress standing with arms outstretched to the moon, muttering an untamed prayer. I discorded thoughts of murder before putting Metzget in front of me. We crept behind Uxastal and into an alley next to our prison. There we met a wild dog who snarled as we entered. I pushed us forward, hoping we turned the corner before Uxastal looked. The dog continued to bark. I kicked it and whacked it until it ran away. As it trotted, strange words came from the alley entrance. I turned and Ixistal stood smiling and holding a sword.
You Existal, great warrior, no kill Emilian, capture Emilian no chance.
She was probably right. Uxastal came at me, swinging low, aiming for my legs. I stumbled back. He easily knocked my sword aside when I blocked one of his blows or tried to stab him. Uxastal began hurting me, pushing me back into a building wall. The obsidian shards struck at my arms and legs, leaving me too busy to strike back. The blade came at me as my opponent laughed at my feeble display. His strikes came faster than thought as he aimed at my right hand, right leg, and left leg. Twice he struck my sword hard, trying to loosen my grip. I kept away from him, afraid of the blade, hoping he would tire as we circled around the alley. Eventually his laughter faded into a frown, and he struck me with the flat of the blade over the head while I was protecting my legs. I saw angels and retreated backwards. I felt the wall at my back. Ixistal did not need to call for other warriors. He had the situation under control. But both he and I had forgotten something. An arm came across his throat from the rear, and his face showed shock, and he began turning. I thrust immediately, driving my blade into his chest, where I learned the sharpness of the obsidian shards as they cut through muscle and bones and glided into Ixistal's heart. The murderer's mouth opened in surprise, but had no time to form words as he fell back, almost onto Metzget. Now there were other voices and sounds coming from the Tanaka quarters. I grabbed Metzget's hand and we ran. We went back to the church Ixistal had desecrated the first day. The priest had a hidden chamber used for private prayers, and we hid there. Metzget and I heard footsteps and noises the next day, but the Tanakas did not find us. At sunrise the day after, we climbed to the church bell tower and saw 3 ships pulling away from the dock.
They harm many people with pistols.
How long did your voyage take?
60 days.
I nodded. They will all be dead in 14. Let us pray those boats do not reach your land. Metzget bowed to me.
Emilian, great magic man.
I laughed and pulled her to me, taking joy in her warm flesh. As I stroked her neck, I noticed her pulse, the sign of a beating heart, giving me the love I needed. Love that would give nourishment as our bodies rebuilt this dead land together. Maybe God truly did forgive all sins, washing them away with a love beyond all understanding. Thank you for watching. Bless you. May your loneliest of days end in the discovery of a love without end. God bless.